Hi. I am ready to read the next chapter in Book 4 of the Infinity Ring, Curse of the Ancients. And this is kind of a long chapter. This is chapter 5. It's a little bit longer than normal, but not super long. Hope you're doing well. A sleepless night. Rick strained to keep a tight grip under both of Dak's arms as he helped carry him through the surging storm. Ithic and another man had his feet. He watched Sarah hurrying alongside them, holding a blanket over Dak's face so he wouldn't drown in the falling rain. "Dak," she kept shouting. "Can you hear me? Dak, it's Sarah. Please look at me, Dak." But Dak wasn't looking at anyone. He was out cold. Rick had never seen anyone take such a nasty blow in his life. As they moved past the temple, a sudden gust of wind knocked them all over in the mud. Rick and the two Mayan men scrambled to their feet, quickly lifting Dak up and continuing away from the village toward the hills and the outskirts of town. The women, children, and elders from the hut were several paces ahead, already holding on to one another, leaning to the teeth of the storm. Sorry, my dog. Rick winced as he slowly moved through the mud with Dak. His leg was killing him. He had been struck in the knee by a falling board when the roof of the hut had collapsed. He wasn't sure how much longer he could go on, but every time he thought of asking for a rest, he would picture Dak pushing that little girl out of the way, taking the brunt of the wall's impact on his own head and back. He had saved her life. Remembering this fact always gave Rick the shot of adrenaline he needed to fight through the pain and fatigue. He carried Dak uphill over a few fallen trees, through knee-high puddles of rain, and across long stretches of quicksand like mud. Eventually they approached the mouth of the cave, where several Mayan warriors were perched on large boulders watching the storm. Ithic shouted at the men, "Get Jawsaw immediately. We must help this boy." One of the warriors darted inside the cave. The rest leaped down from the boulders into the rain and helped carry Dak's limp body up the cave's broad opening. Rick was relieved of his grip on Dak once they got inside. He watched Ithic and the others carry Dak across the dimly lit cave, Sarah trailing closely behind. It took Rick's eyes a few seconds to adjust to the dull candlelight, but once he could see, he was taken aback. Several hundred Mayans were spread out on blankets across the uneven floor of the cave. Some were sleeping. Others were sitting together in small groups, chanting. A few turned to look at him over. A man wearing a headdress pointed the men carrying Dak toward a large hanging blanket, set up like a screen for privacy. Rick knew this must be the man Ithic had reference to as Jawsaw, and he hurried to catch up. When he ducked behind the blanket, he saw the men lowering Dak onto a cot. There were other patients on cots nearby. Rick was relieved they'd made it out of the storm to a place where Dak might get help, and only now did he reach down to massage his aching knee. When he brought his fingers back up to his face, he saw blood. Ooh, the board had cut him. Rick moved toward Dak's cot, nodding to the men who had helped carry Dak as they left. "Who are you anyway?" Sarah was asking the men, looking over Dak's wounds. "I am Jawsaw," he said without looking up. "The Amen medicine man of our village. Your friend is very hurt." "And how do you know how hurt he is?" Sarah said. "It's not like you're a real doctor." "What is doctor?" Jawsaw said, looking up at her. Rick placed his hand on Sarah's arm to try to calm her down. "How bad are his injuries?" he asked Jawsaw. The man turned his focus back to Dak and shook his head. He ran his hands lightly over Dak's face and neck, and then left them hovering over his eyes, as if he was trying to read something through his palms. Then he leaned an ear against Dak's chest. "Something has struck your friend on the head, yes?" Rick and Sarah both nodded. "He's breathing normally, but I fear his brain may swell, which would be very bad." Rick watched the man grind up several different kinds of herbs, stir them into a liquid that looked like wine, and drip some of the concoction on Dak's tongue. Then he rubbed his hands together and touched Dak's head and back. "No broken bones," he said. "How do you know?" Sarah said. "You don't have an x-ray machine. You don't have anything." "Sarah," Rick said, "he's doing the best he can." "I have what I need," Jossaw said. Sarah turned to Rick. "We have to go to the hospital now." Rick could see the fear flickering in Sarah's eyes. "But Ithic says he's the best," Rick told her. "The best what?" Sarah said. "The best mystic?" "Healer. Dak needs a real doctor," Sarah said. "You saw that wall fall on him." Rick rubbed Sarah's shoulders. "Excuse me. We can't chance warping out of here with Dak unconscious. You said it yourself. It's getting harder and harder on our bodies. We have to wait until he's stronger." Jossaw was now pushing his hands up Dak's chest toward his face. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked him. "I'm ridding his body of evil spirits," Jossaw said, without looking up. Sarah shot Rick a desperate look. "I'm staying right here," she said, "all night. I'm making sure he doesn't care. I'm making sure he takes care of Dak." Jossaw burned a plant-based incense over Dak's body. The smell was strong. Rick knew Sarah didn't believe in anything spiritual like this. She believed in hard science, but this was Dak's only hope. He pictured what happened again, Dak rushing into the middle of the hut, pushing the girl to safety, and the wall coming down on the back of his head. Rick leaned in close to Dak's ear and said in a quiet voice that even Sarah wouldn't be able to hear, "You saved that girl's life, Dak. You know it. You're a hero." He kept waiting for Dak to open his eyes and say something sarcastic, but he never did. He just lay there completely still as Jossaw rubbed dark ash onto his forehead. Rick tried sleeping on the blanket Ithic set out for him, but he was unable to shut off his mind. He kept picturing the stone wall coming down on Dak and the cryptic riddle they pulled up on the S square. He had also thought about his time on the run in 1850. He had been able to keep a young boy, James, out of the hands of slave traders. Why was he so helpless now? Eventually, he gave up on sleep. He walked quietly over to the cave's opening and sat on a boulder to watch the powerful storm. The rain still poured down. The rain still pouring down on the beautiful green Mayan landscape. The wind still whipped through the trees, but the thunder and lightning seemed more distant now, which told Rick the worst of it had passed. Rick had always been intrigued by natural disasters. In an odd way, sometimes he even found himself rooting for storms and earthquakes and tornadoes. It's not that he wanted to see anyone hurt, and he knew the increased frequencies of disasters was a direct result of the SQ creating breaks in history. The breaks he, Dak, and Sarah were busy trying to correct. But he also thought that maybe the right disaster would come along and hit the SQ where it hurt, compromising their political button. Maybe it would be like hitting the reset button on the world. But there was a non-SQ related reason he was so fascinated by disasters too. A reason nobody who knew him would ever suspect. Secretly, Rick sometimes wanted to hit the reset button on his own life. For as long as he could remember, he worked tirelessly to the best of everything he did. School, soccer, language acquisition, the art of memory. At first it was fun. And the praise he'd received made him feel special. But somehow along the way, things shifted. The fun faded. The pressure to stay on top started weighing down on his shoulders. He put all those extra hours not because he was enjoying himself, but because he was afraid to fail. Lately, he had been having an awful reoccurring nightmare where Brent and Mary followed him around, shaking their heads in disappointment. His classmates spoke in hushed voices about him getting only an A-. Rick was watching the pouring rain, dreaming about living a normal life where he slept in the weekends, and hang out at the mall where he heard footsteps creeping up behind him. He spun around quickly, instinctively popping to his feet. It was Kaisa. "Hi," she said, grinning at his military move. "Hey," Rick said back, slowly unclenching his fist. "I can't sleep either." She was holding a small wooden box in her right hand. "I keep thinking about what happened to your friend. I'm really sorry." Rick nodded. "Jawsaw is a gifted healer, though. He'll make sure your friend has the best care." "Thanks," Rick said. He searched his mind for something else to say, but he didn't have any experience talking to girls like Kaisa, so he sort of just stood there, awkwardly looking at her. "What about you?" she said. "How's your knee?" He furrowed his brow, confused. "How'd you know I hurt my knee?" She switched the wooden box from her right hand to her left. "I saw you limping while you were carrying your friend. And then in the cave, you were rubbing it. You should really tell Jawsaw what happened." "I'll be okay," Rick said. "It's just a cut." He looked at her for a few long seconds, trying to think of something else to say. Something that would keep her out here with him. But his mind felt sluggish and his stomach had a weird feeling again. "Mind if I sit out here for a bit?" she asked. "Yes," he said, a little too excitedly. No, I don't mind. Yes, you can sit." He felt heat rising up into his cheeks and the tips of his ears. What does that mean? Keisha sat on the boulder next to his and sat down her wooden box. "What's in there?" Rick said. "Jewelry," she said. "I figured if I was going to have a sleepless night, I might as well get some work done." Rick watched her remove a small block of wood and a knife and started whittling. "My mother said it's a man's job to make artisan things," she said. "But I know my jewelry's as good as any man's, if not better." She looked up at Rick. "I hate that there are things girls aren't supposed to be good at." "Who says?" Kaisha pulled a metal piece out of the box and held it up for Rick to see. He took the bracelet and turned it over in his hands. "Wow," he said. It was shaped like a thin, coiled snake. Each scale was meticulously crafted, as were the eyes and tongue. It was as well constructed as any piece of jewelry he had seen in the modern world. "I'm impressed," he told her, handing back the snake. Kaisa smiled and put it away. "Can I ask you something, Rick? I've been wondering about it all night." "Of course," he said. "What's a historian?" He studied her dark brown eyes. During training back home, his supervisors drilled into him the importance of guarding historian intel. Even the daily cafeteria menu was password protected. But Rick was weary from all the time traveling and the storm and what had happened to Dak. He needed to talk to someone, so he did. He told Keisha about the SQ. Hi, say hi. Dash, say hi. All right, let me finish reading. He told Sarah about the SQ and Aristotle's theory about the Great Breaks. He explained how the world was thrown off balance every time history had been altered by the SQ, causing strange occurrences all over. Far worse than his storm. He told her historians were people stationed throughout time, trained to look out for the time travelers. Aristotle predicted would one day show up for the future and try to fix history and save the world. Okay, I'm going to put him down. When he finished, Kaisa turned, looked at him for a long time before saying, "So you three really are from the future, like your friend said?" Rick knew he'd said too much already. He expected this to make him feel tremendously guilty, but it didn't. For whatever reason, he trusted Kaisa. "It's okay," she said. "You don't have to answer that." She went back to whittling away on her piece of wood. Rick could see what she was carving, a snake rising up out of a basket. "Can I ask you a question now, Kaisa?" She nodded. "Did you live in that hut that was destroyed?" "No," she said, "but I spent a lot of time there. My uncle Ithik lived there with his family." "How will he fix it? And where will everyone live in the meantime?" "Someone will take them in," she said. "We all look out for one another in my village." Let me get him up here. They talked for a while longer, mostly about Kaisa's family and her village. Rick was moved about how much they cared for each other and how much they respected the land. They seemed far different from the way they were presented in history class, and he was surprised to find out that Ithik was no ordinary man. He was the king of Izamal. He had been for years. Then they sat together in silence, Kaisa whittling and Rick watching the rain soften and the dark slowly lose its grip on the sky. It felt nice sitting beside her without talking. He didn't feel awkward anymore. Eventually, Kaisa packed up her things and stood and wished Rick a good night. But she didn't leave right away. She just stood there watching the quiet rain fall for a few minutes. "One day," she finally said, turning to Rick, "I want to do something special, too." "I bet you will," he said. She smiled, then turned and walked back into the cave. It wasn't until Kaisa was long gone that Rick noticed she'd left the snake bracelet on the boulder where she'd been sitting. He was about to scoop it up and hurry after her, but then he saw the message she'd carved into the rock. He stared at the glyphs for several seconds. He was one of the few historians who could decipher Mayan writings, but it wasn't easy. Eventually, he was able to read, "For my new friend, Rick." He slipped the bracelet onto his wrist, feeling a wave of excitement pass through his body. He lifted the piece of jewelry up to his eyes and studied the details of the metallic snake. And then a thought suddenly occurred to him. What if Kaisa was the snake charmer from the riddle? And that's the end of that chapter. Chapter 6 is the symbol of the Siba tree. Have a great day. Get outside. It's sunny today. And go have some fun outside. Bye.